The slap echoed across the marble ballroom like a gunshot. Evangeline Fournier should have dropped to her knees, stammered apologies, begged forgiveness from 200 guests dressed in diamonds and designer silk. Instead, she locked eyes with the most dangerous crime lord in New York and spoke in a language dead for 70 years, the secret Cajun French of New Orleans' smuggling dynasties. Words her dying grandmother had whispered through hospital oxygen masks. 75 pistols swiveled toward the 25-year-old waitress, standing in a puddle of spilled champagne. By dawn, Evangeline would shatter a conspiracy worth $200 million. She would save the kingpin from his oldest enemy. She would become equal partner in an empire built on blood oaths and buried Confederate gold. But first, she had to survive the next 6 hours. Let me show you the moment everything changed. Red Hook Marina, 2 in the morning, gunfire tearing through salt air. 2 speedboats converging on coordinates where a steamship had rested underwater since Eisenhower's first term. Evangeline 25 meters down in black water, fingers closing around a brass key stamped with an eagle clutching a serpent. Behind her, Sterling Blackwell, the man who murdered her father, aligning crosshairs on the back of her skull. How did a broke waitress juggling 3 jobs end up here? 6 hours earlier. Meet Evangeline Fournier, 25 years old, $11 an hour plus tips that barely covered subway fare. 3 part-time gigs across Brooklyn, medical debts stacking up like snowdrifts. $47,000 for Delphine Fournier's cardiac ICU bills. Medications keeping her grandmother's failing heart beating another week, another day. Bank balance showing $340. Hospital administration's final warning taped to the refrigerator. 72 hours until life support gets unplugged. Evangeline adjusted her polyester vest in the staff bathroom of Marchetti Catering, 3rd employer this month. The mirror showed dark circles under green eyes, her mother's eyes, before the car crash. Her father's cheekbones, sharp enough to cut glass. Both parents dead 19 years now, their Ford Taurus discovered wrapped around an I-95 overpass support beam. Police reports said, brake failure. Delphine whispered different truths through morphine fog. Someone tampered with the hydraulics, made it look accidental, but the Fournier bloodline carried secrets people killed to protect. The silver locket around Evangeline's neck held their wedding photo. She touched it now, a prayer or a promise. Her phone buzzed. Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. She deleted the message without reading. Couldn't afford to break down before a shift that might net $200 if the Wall Street crowd tipped heavy. Anthony Romano burst into the bathroom, 60 pounds overweight and perpetually sweating through discount suit jackets. You're up, Fournier. The Ashford Estate, Brooklyn Heights, 75th anniversary party. Old money, serious money. Keep your head down, mouth shut, and maybe you walk out with enough tips to make rent. The Ashford mansion rose like a feudal castle transplanted to brownstone Brooklyn, all Gothic revival spires and leaded windows spilling golden light across manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than Evangeline earned annually. Luxury sedans line the circular driveway, Bentleys, Maseratis, a Rolls-Royce Phantom with diplomat plates. Men in Italian tailoring conversed in clusters on the terrace, voices pitched low enough that individual words dissolved into conspiratorial murmurs. Women glided through the grand ballroom, wearing gowns Evangeline recognized from Vogue editorials she'd never afford. This wasn't just New York elite. This was power that operated beyond elections in stock markets, the kind that rewrote laws in back rooms and made prosecutors lose evidence. Evangeline balanced a tray of champagne flutes, each one probably worth her weekly grocery budget. The ballroom stretched 40 feet to hand-painted ceilings depicting eagles in flight. A Swarovski chandelier the size of a compact car threw prismatic light across floors of Carrara marble. The walls displayed what had to be original Caravaggios, casually hung like department store prints. The scent hit her before anything else registered. white truffle shavings over Wagyu beef, mingled with Creed Aventus cologne and Cuban cigar smoke from the terrace. Her stomach clenched. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch, saving money for Delphine's medication copay. She wove through conversations, catching fragments. The waterfront rezoning vote needs 3 more council members on board. I have 2. Can you deliver the third? The shipment from Charleston clears customs Tuesday. Make sure your people are ready. Words that sounded legitimate until you noticed how voices dropped when servers approached, how eyes tracked uniforms with the wariness of men accustomed to surveillance. Evangeline offered champagne to a silver-haired senator she recognized from cable news. He took a glass without glancing at her face, pressed a $5 bill into her apron pocket like feeding a parking meter. $5. 46,995 to go. Her phone vibrated against her hip. Another message from the hospital. She let it buzz into silence. A shift in the room's energy made her glance toward the grand staircase. The crowd parted with practiced deference, conversations trailing into expectant quiet. Knox Ashford descended like a predator, taking inventory of territory. 6'2", shoulders broad enough to strain the seams of his Tom Ford suit. Silver threads at his temples added distinguished gravity to otherwise dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins. All brutal angles and aristocratic severity. A thin scar traced his right cheekbone from temple to jaw, the kind you earned with knives, not accidents. His eyes, pale gray like winter Atlantic, missed nothing as they swept the assembly. He moved without sound despite his size, each step deliberate. Guests straightened unconsciously when he passed. Senators and CEOs suddenly looking like students before a headmaster. A federal judge actually stepped aside, nodding deferentially. Who commands that kind of authority? Evangeline's pulse quickened with instinctive wariness. The platinum cufflinks at Knox's wrists bore engravings she couldn't make out from this distance. But the Patek Philippe watch on his left wrist she recognized. Vintage 1952, the kind that sold at auction for $750,000. He wore power like a second skin, comfortable and absolute. Evangeline forced herself to look away, to keep moving through her section with mechanical efficiency. Invisible. That was the key to survival in rooms like this. Be furniture with legs. The wound lived in her locket, pressed against her heartbeat. Sarah and Michael Fournier on their wedding day, her mother's white dress catching sunlight, her father's smile wide and unguarded. Evangeline had been 7 when the police knocked on Delphine's door, had watched her grandmother age a decade in the span of that terrible phone call. The official report cited brake failure. Delphine, in her Louisiana drawl, thickened by grief, had leaned close that night and whispered truths that reshaped Evangeline's understanding of the world. Your daddy found something he wasn't meant to find, Cher. Asked questions that got dangerous people nervous. That car crash wasn't no accident. Somebody made sure your parents couldn't tell what they knew. Evangeline had pressed for details. Who, what, why. But Delphine had sealed those answers behind a wall of protective silence that 18 years hadn't breached. Only the Cajun French remained, that secret language Delphine insisted Evangeline master. Hour after patient hour of pronunciation drills and grammatical structures extinct everywhere except in their Brooklyn apartment. Why do I need to learn a dead language, Nana? Because one day, baby girl, it might be the only thing that saves your life. The want crystallized every time Evangeline checked her bank balance. Every shift worked until her feet bled in cheap shoes. $50,000. That's what the hospital needed for Delphine's valve replacement surgery, the procedure that might buy her grandmother another 5 years instead of 5 weeks. Evangeline had maxed out credit cards, sold everything valuable she owned, started a GoFundMe that generated exactly 0 donations because strangers didn't care about one more broke woman's dying relative. 3 days left. 72 hours before they unplugged the machines and let Delphine slip away. Evangeline blinked hard against the burn behind her eyes. Not here. Not now. The grand oak doors at the ballroom's far end swung inward. The assembled power brokers fell into respectful silence as Augustus Ashford entered, leaning on a cane topped with a silver lion's head. 75 years old but still commanding presence through sheer force of will, his traditional black suit and ramrod posture speaking to old-world authority that didn't bend for changing times. Though Knox ran the family operations, everyone understood whose word remained final in matters of tradition and honor. Knox crossed the room to greet his father, taking the old man's hand and touching his cheek in a gesture that humanized both of them for a heartbeat. "A magnificent gathering, my son." Augustus surveyed the assembly with eyes that had lost none of their predatory sharpness. "Our family's 75 years in America deserves nothing less." Knox guided his father toward a small stage where a microphone waited. A gentle tap brought complete silence. Knox's voice carried natural command, the kind that made grown men pay attention. "Distinguished guests, family, friends, tonight we celebrate 3 generations of Ashford heritage in America. From our roots in New Orleans to becoming an integral part of New York's landscape. Please join me in welcoming the man who built everything we enjoy today, my father, Augustus Ashford." Applause rolled through the ballroom. Augustus took the microphone, his accent carrying traces of Louisiana Bayou that 70 years in Brooklyn hadn't quite erased. 75 years ago, my father, Ezekiel Ashford, brought our family from New Orleans with nothing but determination and the ancient values of our heritage. Honor, family, legacy. Augustus paused, his gaze finding faces in the crowd with deliberate intent. "Tonight, as we celebrate what we have built together, I believe it is time to fulfill an obligation that has remained incomplete for too long. The blood oath sworn in New Orleans must finally be honored." A murmur rippled outward from the stage. Knox's expression remained neutral, but Evangeline caught the slight tension in his shoulders. His father had mentioned no blood oath during their planning discussions. She could read that realization in the controlled stillness of his posture. "Enjoy the celebration," Augustus concluded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The night is young, and there is much to discuss." The orchestra resumed, violins and cellos filling spaces where words had been. Knox escorted Augustus to a private corner. Their heads bent close in urgent conversation, Evangeline couldn't hear from her position by the champagne fountain. She was refilling her tray when the accident happened. Augustus pivoted without warning, gesturing toward an oil painting of a steamship on the far wall. His shoulder connected with the edge of Evangeline's tray just as she lifted it from the fountain. 12 champagne flutes arced through air in slow motion, liquid catching chandelier light like diamonds suspended in amber. Time crystallized into individual frames, the glasses tumbling, Augustus directly in their trajectory, champagne about to drench his $15,000 Brioni suit. Evangeline didn't think. Her body moved on trained instinct. Years of boxing classes at the YMCA, muscle memory from when she'd had time and money for self-defense. Left hand shot up, caught the tray's edge, redirected its momentum skyward. Right foot pivoted 45 degrees, shifting her center of gravity. Right hand reached out and gripped Augustus's shoulder, pulling the old man back 15 centimeters in the span of a heartbeat. 11 glasses shattered against marble. The 12th fell perfectly into Evangeline's palm. Not a drop spilled. 200 people froze. The orchestra's note hung unfinished in stunned air. Evangeline stood there holding a champagne flute and a silver tray, her heart hammering against her ribs, slowly realizing what she'd just done. Anthony Romano materialized from nowhere, his face purple with rage and terror. His hand closed around her upper arm hard enough to bruise. "What the hell was that?" Before she could explain, the old man turned. "It wasn't my fault, I was just..." Romano's open palm cracked across her left cheek. The slap knocked her head sideways. Copper taste flooded her mouth where teeth cut inner flesh. The ballroom tilted, chandelier blurring into streaks of light. 200 witnesses watched, and not one moved to intervene. Romano grabbed a fistful of her vest, yanking her off balance. "You just embarrassed my company in front of the most important clients in New York. You're fired, and you'll pay for every broken glass, every—" The second slap came harder. Evangeline's knees hit marble. Blood from her split lip dripped onto white stone. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard whispers. "Clumsy idiot. Poor girl. Someone should call security." But nobody moved. Nobody helped. The senator who tipped her $5 examined his champagne flute. The Fortune 500 CEO she'd served 3 times checked his Rolex. The federal judge who'd nodded at Knox turned away entirely. To them, she wasn't human. She was a malfunctioning appliance, embarrassing in its breakdown, but ultimately disposable. 6 meters away, Knox Ashford stood motionless. His face revealed nothing, but his right hand had moved inside his jacket, resting on something concealed there. His pale, gray eyes tracked every detail with the focus of a man assessing threats, calculating responses. Evangeline pushed herself upright, wiped blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, met Anthony Romano's glare without flinching. "I apologize for the accident." Her voice came out steady despite the tremor in her legs. "But I don't apologize for saving Mr. Ashford from being drenched in champagne. If you're firing me for that, then I accept." Romano raised his hand for a third strike. Augustus Ashford's cane struck marble with the crack of a judge's gavel. Enough. The single word carried absolute authority. Romano's hand froze mid-swing. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the patriarch. Augustus approached Evangeline with slow, deliberate steps. He studied her face, the defiant tilt of her chin, the blood on her mouth, the way she refused to cower despite having every reason to fear what came next. This young woman reacted quickly. "Save me from an unpleasant soaking. I see no fault in her actions." Romano stammered something about broken glasses, company reputation, protocols. "I will pay for the damaged champagne. $500 should cover 11 flutes, yes?" "Of course, Mr. Ashford. Whatever you say, sir." Augustus turned his full attention to Evangeline. She felt the weight of that gaze, sharp as scalpels, dissecting her with clinical precision. "Your name, child?" The question seemed simple. It wasn't. Evangeline felt the moment's strange gravity, sensed some invisible threshold she was about to cross. She opened her mouth to give the expected answer. Polite, brief, forgettable. But when she looked into Augustus Ashford's weathered face, she saw something that triggered muscle memory stronger than conscious thought. Delphine's voice echoed across years of careful instruction. "When you meet a Louisiana elder, baby, you show proper respect. You use the old words, the respectful forms. That's how they know you're one of us." The Cajun French flowed out before Evangeline could stop it. "Mon nom c'est Evangeline Fournier, parrain. Merci pour la bonté." "My name is Evangeline Fournier, honored elder. Thank you for your kindness." The dialect her grandmother had drilled into her neurons, the secret language of New Orleans' smuggling dynasties, words that hadn't been spoken publicly in decades. Pure Louisiana Creole French from the 1940s, grammatically perfect, accent flawless. Augustus Ashford's cane clattered to the floor. The old man's eyes went wide, mouth falling open in shock. His hand trembled as it rose to point at Evangeline, the gesture carrying the weight of seeing a ghost made flesh. Across the ballroom, Knox's hand emerged from his jacket, holding a Beretta 92 FS. He didn't aim it, not yet, but the weapon's presence shifted every calculation in the room. 4 men in expensive suits moved into formation around Evangeline, their own firearms appearing with practiced synchronicity. The crowd erupted into urgent whispers. What did she say? Was that French? Italian? Why does Ashford look like he's seen the dead walk? Augustus took a stumbling step closer, his weathered face working through emotions Evangeline couldn't name. When he spoke, his voice cracked with something between wonder and grief. Where did you learn that language, child? That particular dialect? In all America, perhaps 3 people still speak it. 2 of them are in this room. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd made a terrible mistake, revealed something she shouldn't have, but couldn't undo what was already done. My grandmother taught me, sir, Delphine Fournier. She said it was our family's heritage from Louisiana, that I needed to remember the old ways. Augustus's knees buckled. Knox was there instantly, catching his father before the old man hit the ground. The Beretta had disappeared back into Knox's jacket, but his body language radiated coiled threat as he scanned for dangers that had just become terrifyingly real. Father, what's wrong? Augustus gripped Knox's arm with shaking hands, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the shocked silence. Delphine Fournier, daughter of Nathaniel Fournier. She's alive? After all these years? Knox's gray eyes snapped to Evangeline's face, reassessing her with the intensity of a prosecutor who just discovered exculpatory evidence. Every detail, her bone structure, eye color, the way she stood despite fear, suddenly mattered in ways that made Evangeline's survival instinct scream warnings. The senator who'd tipped her $5 earlier was already on his phone. The Fortune 500 CEO had positioned himself near the exit, smart people recognizing when the temperature in a room had just become lethal. Augustus released Knox and straightened, decades of command reasserting themselves despite the emotion cracking his voice. He addressed the ballroom. This celebration marks 75 years of our family in America. Yet the most profound gift comes from an unexpected quarter. A young woman who speaks the dialect of our ancestral home, who carries a name we thought lost to history. He extended a trembling hand toward Evangeline. Miss Fournier, would you join me at the family table? There are matters we must discuss, questions that have haunted me for 70 years. Behind Augustus, Knox's expression had shifted from alarm to something harder to read. Suspicion warred with what might have been hope, or perhaps merely tactical calculation. He moved to Evangeline's side, his hand closing around her elbow with controlled force. Not quite pain, but the unmistakable pressure of someone accustomed to compliance. My father has made a request, Miss Fournier. In our family, that's not a suggestion. His breath was warm against her ear, his voice pitched for her alone. I don't know what game you're playing, but if you're here to harm my father, I will make your death last weeks. Across the ballroom, Anthony Romano was making frantic, throat-cutting gestures, silently screaming at her to refuse, to run, to do anything except what she was about to do. But Evangeline thought of Delphine in her hospital bed, machines breathing for her, 3 days left before the plugs got pulled. Thought of her mother's smile in the locket, her father's unanswered questions. Thought of 72 hours to find $50,000 she didn't have. Sometimes you had to walk into the fire to find what you'd lost. I'd be honored, she heard herself say. Knox's grip on her elbow tightened fractionally. Acknowledgement or warning, she couldn't tell. He guided her through the parting crowd toward the table of honor, where crystal and silver gleamed under chandelier light. Her polyester uniform stood out like a crow among peacocks, marking her as fundamentally not belonging in this stratosphere of wealth and danger. The patriarch settled into the seat of honor at the table's center. He gestured to the empty chair beside him, a place clearly meant for someone important, someone who mattered. Evangeline sat slowly, feeling the weight of 200 calculating stares tracking her every movement. Knox took the seat on her other side, effectively trapping her between the 2 most powerful men in the room. Augustus studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. But Delphine had taught her better. You show weakness to predators, Cher, they'll tear you apart. You keep your chin up and your eyes steady, no matter how scared you are inside. Tell me about your grandmother, child. Is Delphine well? The question twisted something in Evangeline's chest. She's in Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, ICU, 4th floor, heart failure. She needs valve replacement surgery, but the words stuck in her throat. Admitting poverty to people who wore watches worth more than her entire life felt like stripping naked in public. But I can't afford it. Evangeline forced the confession out. The surgery costs $47,000. I have 340. The hospital gives me 72 hours before they stop treatment. Augustus's hand covered hers, the gesture paternal, unexpected and somehow more frightening than Knox's threats. Your grandmother has carried a terrible burden alone for far too long. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a photograph so worn the edges had gone soft. This is myself and your great-grandfather, 1948. The black and white image showed two young men standing proudly before a wooden steamship, the New Orleans waterfront unmistakable behind them. One was clearly Augustus at maybe 23, his face unlined but already carrying the weight of dangerous knowledge. The other man, similar age, darker complexion, eyes that held Evangeline's own shape, wore work clothes and a defiant smile. Giovanni Fournier and Augustus Ashford, the old man said softly. We were more than business partners, we were blood brothers. Evangeline stared at her great-grandfather's face, a man she'd never known existed until 30 seconds ago. Delphine had told stories about New Orleans, about family left behind, but never mentioned any connection to the Ashford name. Our families controlled import of goods from Louisiana to New York. Augustus's voice took on the cadence of old grief. Rum during Prohibition, produce during the Depression, other commodities during the war years. From humble beginnings, we built an empire together. He paused, and the silence carried the weight of violence unsaid. Until 1955, when tragedy tore our families apart. Knox leaned forward, his skepticism cutting through the emotion like a scalpel through tissue. Father, this could be anyone. We have no verification that she's actually related to the Fourniers we knew. She could be a plant, someone sent to... Augustus silenced his son with a look. Look at her eyes, Knox. The same eyes as Delphine. The same fire. He turned back to Evangeline. Your grandmother never told you about us? Evangeline shook her head, feeling the conversation's currents pulling her into depths she couldn't navigate. She tells stories about Louisiana, about the old ways, but she never mentioned your family, never said anything about... Because the pain was too great, Augustus's voice broke. The explosion at the dockyard in 1955, many lives lost from both families, accusations made in grief and anger. Your great-grandparents fled north, believing we had betrayed them. The conversation died abruptly as tension crystallized through the ballroom like ice spreading across glass. Evangeline followed Knox's suddenly alert gaze toward the entrance, where a man had appeared without invitation or announcement. Sterling Blackwell moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit with a blood-red tie, silver hair swept back from a face that belonged on currency, if currency celebrated cruelty. Two men flanked him, their suits cut to accommodate shoulder holsters they didn't bother hiding. Knox stood in one fluid motion, his body language shifting into something predatory. I don't recall your name on the guest list, Blackwell. Augustus's expression hardened into something ancient and cold. The Blackwell family has always been opportunistic. Sterling must have heard rumors about tonight's announcement. Sterling approached their table with calculated arrogance, his eyes finding Evangeline, and lingering with the assessment of a jeweler examining a suspicious diamond. Augustus, Knox. He offered a smile that never touched his eyes. Forgive my uninvited appearance, but I couldn't miss celebrating such an esteemed family's milestone. And who might this lovely addition be? Before Evangeline could respond, Knox positioned himself slightly between her and Sterling. Family business, Blackwell. Nothing that concerns you. Sterling's smile thinned to a predator's warning. Family business. How fascinating. You have the look of Louisiana about you, young lady. The old blood shows through, even after generations. Something in his tone made Evangeline's skin crawl. Recognition mixed with calculation, like he was already planning how to use her before knowing who she was. Fournier, Sterling said suddenly, making Evangeline flinch. That's what it is. You have the Fournier features. I thought that bloodline had ended decades ago. Augustus's cane struck marble hard enough to crack stone. You were just leaving, Sterling. This is a private celebration. Sterling stepped back with theatrical deference, though his attention remained locked on Evangeline. Of course. But we should talk soon, Knox, about the changing landscape at the waterfront, about old debts that remain unsettled. He shifted his focus back to Evangeline, about family secrets that some people would pay dearly to keep buried. As Sterling departed with his armed shadows, Evangeline noticed Knox signal discreetly to several men positioned around the ballroom's perimeter. They peeled away to follow Blackwell's exit, their movements coordinated with military precision. Knox remained standing until Sterling had cleared the building. Only then did he reclaim his seat, though every line of his body stayed coiled for violence. Augustus turned to Evangeline, urgency replacing the earlier nostalgia. Come with me, child. There are things you must see. Things your grandmother has perhaps kept from you for too long. Knox objected immediately. Father, this isn't the time. We know nothing about her beyond a name and a language that could have been learned anywhere. I know enough. Augustus rose from his chair with unexpected strength. The oath I made to Giovanni transcends your concerns, Knox. Some promises span generations. He extended his hand to Evangeline. Please, what I'm about to show you will answer questions you didn't know to ask, and it may be the only way to save Delphine's life. Augustus led Evangeline through the mansion's private corridors, Knox following 3 paces behind, with his hand resting inside his jacket. They passed oil paintings worth millions, marble busts of men whose faces belonged to history books, hallways wide enough to drive vehicles through. The opulence should have impressed her. Instead, it reinforced how far outside her world she'd stumbled. They entered a study lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes, antique maps under glass, artifacts that belonged in museums. Augustus unlocked an ornate cabinet with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. From inside, he withdrew a leather album larger and more elaborate than anything Evangeline had seen outside of libraries. The complete history of our families. Augustus laid the album reverently on a mahogany desk. Before the tragedy, before the misunderstandings that poisoned 70 years. He opened to a page marked with faded ribbon. Evangeline's breath caught. The photograph showed her grandmother as a young woman, maybe 20, beautiful in a way time and grief had eroded. Delphine stood beside a handsome man in naval uniform, surrounded by people whose joy radiated even through decades-old silver nitrate. They posed on the deck of a magnificent steamship, its name visible on a life preserver, Mississippi Queen. Behind them, a flag bearing an eagle clutching a serpent fluttered in captured wind. Your grandparents' engagement celebration, 1954. Augustus's finger traced the edges with the gentleness of touching sacred relics. The last time both families were truly united. Evangeline leaned closer, studying faces. There, Augustus as a young man, arm around a striking woman who must have been his wife. And there, her great-grandfather, Giovanni, the man from the earlier photograph, looking proud and prosperous in a suit that spoke of new money, trying to look old. I don't understand. The words came out smaller than Evangeline intended. Why would Delphine hide this? Why pretend your families never existed? Augustus turned pages, revealing newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Headlines screamed tragedy in bold typeface. Dockyard explosion kills 11. Arson suspected in warehouse fire. Police seek answers in waterfront tragedy. 6 months after that photograph, our shared warehouse exploded. Augustus's voice flattened with old pain. 11 people died. Your great-grandparents Giovanni and Cecilia Fournier, my older brother Anthony. Workers who'd been with us since New Orleans. The blast was so powerful it shattered windows 3 blocks away. Knox had moved to stand beside them, studying the clippings with professional interest. Each family blamed the other. Augustus continued, accusations of betrayal, sabotage. Your great-grandfather believed we'd arranged the explosion to eliminate him and seize full control of the business. Your grandmother Delphine, just a child then, was taken by relatives who changed their names and disappeared into New York's immigrant communities. Evangeline's mind raced through implications, connecting dots that formed a picture she didn't want to see. But if you didn't cause the explosion, who did? Knox pointed to a detail in one photograph, the steamship's sail bearing that distinctive crest, the eagle and serpent. I've seen this in our family archives, but never understood its significance. The combined Ashford and Fournier family crest. Augustus's voice carried the weight of lost kingdoms. The eagle for Fournier, the serpent for Ashford. Together we were unbeatable in business and loyalty. Separately, he didn't finish, didn't need to. Evangeline struggled to process the flood of information, to reconcile the grandmother who'd raised her with this hidden history of partnership and catastrophe. Why would Delphine keep this secret? Why never tell me about fear? Augustus closed the album with finality, or shame at what followed. Giovanni and I made a blood oath when we were young men in New Orleans. If anything should happen to either family, the other would protect them. When suspicion fell on us for the explosion, your family believed we'd not only failed that oath, but violated it, betrayed everything we'd sworn to defend. Knox had moved to the window overlooking the estate's grounds. His reflection in the glass showed calculation running behind those winter-gray eyes. Blackwell's interest in her isn't coincidental. The timing is too precise. Augustus's expression hardened into something that reminded Evangeline these men weren't philanthropists playing dress-up. They were predators who'd built empires on calculated violence. Sterling Blackwell. He spat the name like poison. His father, Beaumont, was always jealous of our success, always circling our operations like a vulture waiting for weakness. A knock interrupted them. Jasper Moreau entered, Knox's second-in-command she'd learn later. Mid-40s, compact and dangerous, with the economical movements of someone who'd survived by being faster than threats. Boss. His expression carried bad news. 2 of Blackwell's men were spotted examining the property perimeter. They're casing us. Knox's jaw tightened fractionally, the only outward sign of fury that must have been volcanic beneath his controlled surface. Where does your grandmother live, Miss Fournier? The question came sharp as a blade. Evangeline's survival instinct screamed warnings. An apartment in Bensonhurst? Why? What's happening? If Blackwell connected you to the Fournier family from our past, both of you are now targets. Knox's certainty carried the weight of experience. Where exactly is the apartment? Evangeline gave the address, her hands beginning to tremble as implications crystallized into immediate danger. My grandmother is alone there. She has a heart condition. She can't defend herself against... Knox was already issuing orders to Jasper. Send 4 men to secure the apartment. Discreet surveillance positions. If anyone approaches who isn't medical staff or this young woman, I want to know immediately. Augustus countermanded with the authority of someone accustomed to final decisions. No, it's too dangerous to leave her there. If Blackwell is moving against us tonight, Delphine should be brought here where we can protect her properly. Evangeline stood, panic rising like floodwater. I need to go to her now. She won't trust your men. She needs to see me, to know. Knox considered this, then nodded with the briskness of tactical adjustment. I'll take you myself. 4 armed guards will accompany us. Jasper will increase security here during my absence. Before Augustus could object, Knox added, if this is a trap, better to spring it on our terms than wait for Blackwell to choose the moment. As they moved toward the door, Evangeline caught sight of a young woman watching from the hallway. The resemblance to Knox was unmistakable. Same sharp features, same gray eyes, same bearing that suggested she could kill you and make it look like an accident. My daughter Magdalene. Knox's introduction carried warning notes Evangeline didn't fully understand. Maggie, this is Evangeline Fournier. We're going to secure her grandmother. Magdalene's expression registered genuine surprise at the surname. The Fournier family from the old photographs? I thought they were gone. Apparently not. Knox's tone discouraged further questions. Stay close to your grandfather while I'm away. Don't leave his side for any reason. The ride through Brooklyn passed in tense silence. Knox drove a black Mercedes SUV with the controlled aggression of someone trained in high-speed pursuit. Two identical vehicles flanked them, each carrying armed men who made no effort to hide the serious firepower they transported. Evangeline sat rigid in the passenger seat, watching streetlights blur past, her mind cycling through catastrophic scenarios. What if they were already too late? What if Blackwell's people had reached Delphine first? What if this was all an elaborate setup and she was being driven toward execution instead of rescue? Your grandmother won't be happy to see me. Evangeline's voice came out smaller than intended. If what your father said is true, she believes your family killed hers. Knox's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Subtle tell, quickly controlled. My concern is her safety, not her approval. Blackwell is dangerous. If he's making connections between our family's past, everyone involved becomes collateral damage in whatever play he's making. Why would he care about something that happened in 1955? Because in our world, the past is never truly buried. Knox checked the rearview mirror with the paranoia of someone who'd survived by assuming threats. Old grudges, old treasures, old secrets. They surface when you least expect them, and the bodies start piling up before anyone understands why. The radio crackled. Jasper's voice cut through static. Boss, 6 Blackwell operatives just hit the hospital. Our people are holding the ICU 4th floor, but they can't maintain position indefinitely. Knox's expression went absolutely flat, the absence of emotion more frightening than rage. Tell them to hold for 10 minutes. We're almost there. He accelerated, the SUV's engine roaring as they wove through late-night traffic with illegal speed. The vehicles flanking them matched pace, forming a tactical convoy that made civilian cars scramble out of their path. Evangeline's apartment building looked exactly as she'd left it 6 hours earlier. Shabby brick facade, flickering hallway lights, the faint smell of garbage from bins that never got emptied often enough. But Knox's team approached it like a military insertion, 2 men covering angles while the others formed a protective corridor. The door to her apartment stood open. Light spilled into the hallway, illuminating overturned furniture visible even from the threshold. Evangeline's heart stopped. She was running before conscious thought, bursting through the doorway into devastation. Every drawer emptied, contents scattered across floors. Every cushion slashed, stuffing bleeding from wounds. Every book torn apart, pages strewn like confetti after violence. Delphine! The scream tore from her throat as she rushed from room to room, finding only destruction. The small bedroom where her grandmother slept, mattress overturned, dresser drawers smashed. The bathroom, medicine cabinet swept clean, pills crushed underfoot. The kitchen. She found Delphine collapsed beside the small breakfast table, breathing but unconscious. The worn photo album she'd been looking at lay open beside her, several photographs missing from plastic sleeves. Knox entered behind her, weapon drawn, sweeping corners with professional efficiency. Seeing the elderly woman, he immediately holstered the gun and knelt to check her pulse. She needs an ambulance. His fingers pressed against Delphine's carotid with practiced gentleness. Pulse is irregular. She's had a cardiac episode. He was already on his phone, speaking with the clipped precision of someone accustomed to emergency coordination. As he arranged transport, Evangeline noticed something clutched in her grandmother's hand. She gently extracted a piece of paper, small, torn from a notepad, covered in harsh black ink. The message punched her in the stomach. Fournier should know their place. The treasure belongs to Blackwell. Knox read over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. What treasure? I don't know. Evangeline's voice shook. I don't know what any of this means. The paramedics arrived within minutes, too fast for random dispatch, obviously Knox's resources at work. They confirmed Delphine had suffered a cardiac event, likely triggered by shock or extreme stress. As they prepared to transport her, the old woman's eyes fluttered open briefly. Her gaze found Knox first. Terror flooded her weathered face. Ashford. The whisper barely carried, but the fear in it cut like glass. We're here to help, Mrs. Fournier. Knox's formality carried surprising respect. Your granddaughter is under my protection now. Delphine's eyes squeezed shut as medication took effect. The paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher, and Evangeline watched her grandmother disappear into the ambulance, machines already working to stabilize a heart that had endured too much for too long. Knox was examining the ransacked apartment with the focus of a crime scene investigator. They were looking for something specific, not random vandalism, professional search patterns. Evangeline moved to the faded landscape painting that had hung in their living room since before she could remember. A generic seascape, the kind you'd find at yard sales. She lifted it from its hooks. Behind it, a section of wall showed plaster newer than the surrounding surface. There's something here. Knox joined her immediately. Working together, they broke through the thin plaster to reveal a metal box, sealed with a lock that had survived decades. Using a pry bar from his vehicle, Knox forced it open. Inside lay a treasure trove that rewrote Evangeline's understanding of her family history. Documents, old deeds to properties in Louisiana and New York, shipping manifests for goods transported between 1948 and 1955. Business agreements between Ashford and Fournier families, partnership terms spelled out in legal language that made clear this wasn't some small-time operation. These people had moved serious money through legitimate and illegitimate channels. Most importantly, they found a detailed map of Brooklyn's waterfront. A specific section was circled in red ink, coordinates written in faded pencil. The date on the map? March 10th, 1955. 1 week before the explosion that tore the families apart. This is why Blackwell came. Knox held the map to the light, studying details. This is what he's after. Evangeline lifted an old brass key from the box's bottom. The design made her breath catch, half eagle, half serpent. The combined family crest, rendered in metal that had survived 70 years of hiding. Whatever this opens, Knox said carefully, taking the key, it's worth killing for. Evangeline's phone rang. Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. Her hands trembled as she answered. The nurse's voice carried professional sympathy that made Evangeline's stomach drop. Miss Fournier, your grandmother had another episode in the ambulance. We're rushing her into emergency surgery now. Her heart can't take the stress. You should get here as quickly as possible. Knox made an immediate decision. We'll go to the hospital now. My men will secure this evidence and transport it to my home for analysis. Why are you helping us? Evangeline studied his face for deception, for the angle, for whatever play he was running. Your father mentioned a blood oath, but that was generations ago. You don't owe us anything. Knox's expression remained carefully controlled, but something flickered in his winter gray eyes, something that might have been grief or guilt or both. Because I gave my word, and in our world, breaking an oath is worse than death. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried edges sharp enough to cut. Sterling Blackwell murdered my wife 15 years ago. Car bomb meant for me. She died because I wasn't careful enough, wasn't paranoid enough to check the vehicle before she got in. I won't make that mistake again with people under my protection. The pristine corridors of Brooklyn Methodist Hospital felt like a different universe from the chaos they'd left behind. Evangeline paced the surgical waiting area, 4 hours blurring into eternity. Knox sat nearby, his presence drawing curious glances from staff who recognized power when they saw it, even without understanding its source. He ended a quiet phone call and approached her. The surgeon will be out soon. I've arranged for the best cardiac specialist in New York to consult on your grandmother's case. Cost isn't a factor. Evangeline glanced up, exhaustion and worry etched across her face like scars. Why are you still here? You've done your duty, brought us to the hospital, arranged the surgery. You could leave. Knox studied her with the intensity of someone reading a difficult text. The men who ransacked your apartment were professionals. They'll discover you weren't home alone soon enough. Until we understand what they want, you're safer with me than anywhere else. What they want is obvious. Evangeline's voice carried brittle edges. The map, the key, whatever secret my grandmother and your father have kept buried for decades. Perhaps. Knox checked his watch. The gesture she was learning meant he was processing information, calculating next moves. But professionals don't typically leave threatening notes. That was personal. The surgical doors swung open. A weary doctor in blue scrubs approached, his expression professionally neutral, but his exhaustion visible in the slump of his shoulders. Miss Fournier, your grandmother survived the surgery, but her condition remains critical. The damage to her heart was extensive. Without immediate intervention, she wouldn't have made it through the night. Evangeline's knees weakened with relief and renewed fear in equal measure. Can I see her? She's in recovery now. Once stabilized, they'll move her to intensive care. The surgeon hesitated, glancing at a tablet. I should mention the financial aspect. This procedure and the necessary follow-up care are quite expensive without comprehensive insurance. Knox stepped forward smoothly, his presence suddenly filling the space. The expenses have been covered. Mrs. Fournier will receive the best care available for as long as necessary. Send all bills to my office. He produced a business card that made the doctor's eyebrows rise. Whatever was printed there carried enough weight to discourage questions. As the surgeon departed, Evangeline turned to Knox with suspicion, warring against desperate gratitude. I can't accept that. I don't even know what you want in return. Consider it partial repayment of an old debt between our families. Knox's tone made clear this wasn't open for discussion. Now we need to address your security situation. Your apartment isn't safe. I'm not leaving my grandmother. I've arranged for private security outside her room. No one enters without clearance. Knox's phone vibrated with an incoming message. He checked it, his expression darkening. We need to move now. Blackwell's men have been asking questions at your apartment building. They'll check hospitals next. Evangeline stood her ground with the stubbornness that had kept her alive through years of grinding poverty. I'm not going anywhere until I see Delphine. Something in her determination seemed to resonate with Knox. After a moment, he nodded. 10 minutes, then we leave. My home is the only place in Brooklyn beyond Blackwell's immediate reach. When Delphine was finally moved to intensive care, Evangeline entered the sterile room alone. The sight of her fierce, proud grandmother, reduced to a fragile figure amid tubes and monitoring equipment, broke something inside her. She took the old woman's hand, mindful of the IV line. Nana. The Cajun French came naturally. I'm here. You're going to be all right. But Delphine remained unconscious, her breathing assisted by machines, her heart monitored by technology that beeped reassurance in steady rhythm. Evangeline stayed until Knox appeared at the door, his posture carrying the urgency of immediate threat. We need to leave. Now. The journey back to the Ashford estate passed in tense silence. Dawn was breaking over the skyline when the gates swung open to admit them. The grandeur that had impressed her yesterday now felt oppressive under morning light. A gilded cage she was entering voluntarily. A young woman descended the grand staircase as they entered the foyer. Magdalene Ashford possessed the same razor-sharp intelligence in her gray eyes, though her slender frame and delicate features softened the effect. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Evangeline's monthly rent. I had the guest room prepared. Magdalene's curiosity was evident but controlled. "How is your grandmother?" "Critical but stable." Evangeline felt the weight of the past 12 hours crushing down on her. "They're keeping her sedated. Let me show you where you'll stay." Magdalene's kindness felt genuine, which somehow made it more unsettling. "You can clean up, change clothes. Then I promise we'll explain everything we know." Too exhausted to argue, Evangeline followed her up the sweeping staircase. The guest room turned out to be larger than her entire apartment, decorated in tasteful creams and blues, with an adjoining marble bathroom that belonged in magazines. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit." Magdalene lingered at the doorway. "When my mother was killed 15 years ago, my father became obsessively protective. Try not to take his intensity personally." The revelation stopped Evangeline mid-step. "I'm sorry. About your mother." Magdalene's expression remained carefully neutral. Practice control that reminded Evangeline these people survived by never showing weakness. "Car bombing meant for my father. I was 7. The Blackwell family was suspected, but there was never enough evidence to prove it." She hesitated before adding, "When my grandfather mentioned the Fournier name last night, it was the first time I'd seen him truly animated in years. Whatever connection exists between our families clearly matters deeply to him." After Magdalene left, Evangeline stood under the shower's hot spray, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. Her ordinary life as a waitress scrambling to pay bills had been shattered. Now she found herself in a mansion belonging to one of Brooklyn's most powerful crime families, with her grandmother fighting for life and mysterious enemies searching for something her family had kept hidden for decades. The clothes in the closet fit surprisingly well, designer labels with tags still attached. She selected the simplest options, uncomfortable with charity that felt like debt accumulation. 2 hours later, a staff member led her to Augustus Ashford's private study. The elderly patriarch sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, examining documents from Delphine's hidden box. Knox stood by the window, and Magdalene sat cross-legged on an ottoman, studying the old map with intense concentration. "Evangeline." Augustus's weathered face lit up. "You look so much like your grandmother did at your age. It's remarkable." Knox turned from the window, his focus laser-sharp. "How much did Delphine tell you about your family history?" "Almost nothing related to yours," Evangeline admitted, taking the seat Augustus indicated. "She taught me Cajun French, told stories about Louisiana life, but she never mentioned any connection to the Ashford name." Augustus sighed with the weight of 7 decades. "After the explosion, the Fournier family believed we had betrayed them. Your grandmother was convinced I'd orchestrated the tragedy to seize full control of our shared business interests." "Did you?" The question came out more bluntly than Evangeline intended. Augustus didn't flinch. "No. Giovanni and I swore a blood oath after returning from World War II. Our fathers fought together against tyranny. When they came to America, they built their importing business on that foundation of absolute trust." Magdalene spread the old map where everyone could see. "This shows a section of waterfront that doesn't appear on modern maps. It was altered after harbor renovations in the 1960s. Augustus pointed to the red circle on the map. "This is where Giovanni found the explosives, where he took the photographs that should have saved us all. If I just listened to him that day." Knox stepped closer, his shadow falling across the map. "What were you importing that made the warehouse a target?" Augustus's expression grew guarded, the look of a man deciding how much truth to reveal. Official manifests showed produce, textiles, rum. But after the Civil War, many treasures disappeared from plantations in estates across the South. Confederate gold, family heirlooms, artifacts with significant historical value. Some found their way north through various channels. You were smuggling Confederate gold. Evangeline said, realization dawning like a headache. Stolen wealth from the Civil War. Not stolen, Augustus corrected with the care of a man who'd spent decades justifying his choices. Salvaged. Rescued from being lost forever during Reconstruction's chaos. Valuable pieces with centuries of history that would otherwise have been melted down or scattered. Magdalene pulled up information on her tablet. The Sicilian Bank of Brooklyn. Closed 30 years ago, but the building still stands in Red Hook, now converted to luxury apartments. Knox was already accessing details on his phone. The old vault remains intact as an architectural feature. According to building records, safe deposit boxes were removed when the bank closed, except for those that were never claimed. Evangeline reached into her pocket, withdrawing the brass key with its distinctive eagle and serpent design. This could unlock the evidence Giovanni found, the proof that could finally reveal who was really behind the explosion. Augustus leaned forward, excitement lighting his aged features. The combined family crest. Yes, this might be what we've needed for 70 years. Knox remained skeptical, his tactical mind running through scenarios. After 70 years, why would Blackwell suddenly care about ancient history? Perhaps it's not the history he cares about, Magdalene suggested, her intelligence showing in the quick connection she made. But what was lost in that explosion? The shipment itself. Heavy silence fell as they all considered implications spiraling outward from that central mystery. Augustus finally broke it with a sad smile. Giovanni tried to warn me. The day before the explosion, he wanted to show me something. But I was meeting with a senator, couldn't be bothered to listen to my blood brother's concerns. If I'd just taken 30 minutes, the past can't be changed. Knox's pragmatism cut through the guilt. But we can finish what Giovanni started. Expose the truth. Make sure Beaumont Blackwell's crimes don't die with him. The door opened as Jasper Moreau entered, his expression carrying the particular gravity of bad news. We have a situation. One of our men at the hospital reports 2 Blackwell operatives attempting to access Mrs. Fournier's room. Hospital security stopped them, but they'll try again. Evangeline stood immediately, the room tilting slightly as adrenaline spiked. I need to go to her. Too dangerous. Knox's certainty allowed no argument. If they're making such a bold move in daylight, they're desperate. We need to increase security at the hospital and move carefully while keeping your grandmother safe. Magdalene added her voice with the practical intelligence that made Evangeline understand where she'd inherited her father's strategic mind. We should investigate the old bank building. If there's evidence hidden there, we need to find it before Blackwell does. Knox nodded agreement. Magdalene, you'll coordinate hospital security from here. Jasper, prepare a team for the bank operation. We move tonight. Evangeline stepped into the center of the room, her patience finally exhausted. Stop planning around me. This is my grandmother's life at stake, my family's history. I'm not sitting safely in this mansion while you make all the decisions. Knox studied her with new appreciation, respect mixing with a constant calculation. What do you propose? The key belongs to my family. Evangeline held up the brass artifact. I'm part of the bank operation. Non-negotiable. Augustus chuckled softly, the sound carrying genuine warmth. She has Fournier's spirit. Knox, you won't win this argument. After a tense moment, Knox conceded with a curt nod. You'll stay close to me at all times. Do exactly as I say when I say it. The operation began just after midnight. Dressed in black, Evangeline felt surreal slipping through shadows beside Knox and 2 of his most trusted men. The luxury apartment building that had once been Sicilian Bank of Brooklyn stood dark and quiet, its Art Deco facade illuminated by subtle architectural lighting designed to showcase rather than secure. Jasper had already disabled the security system temporarily, creating a loop in surveillance feeds that would show empty hallways instead of their intrusion. The night guard was easily distracted by a minor commotion created by another team member at the front entrance, allowing them to slip through a service door and descend to the basement level. The old bank vault remained impressive despite its conversion to decorative feature. The massive round door stood permanently open, revealing interior space now used as a resident's wine cellar and tasting room. Original safe deposit box walls had been replaced by modern wine racks, but according to renovation blueprints, they preserved a section behind a false panel as a nod to the building's history. Knox moved with surprising grace for someone his size, examining the wall carefully with a small flashlight. Look for anything with our family crests, eagle and serpent. Evangeline ran her fingers along wooden wine racks, feeling for inconsistencies. The key in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Near the corner, her fingers detected a slight difference in wall texture behind one rack. "Here," she whispered, "something feels different." Knox joined her immediately, examining the section she indicated. With careful pressure, a panel in the wall slid aside, revealing an aged metal installation that had clearly remained untouched during renovations. A small keyhole marked with the combined Ashford-Fournier crest waited in the center. Evangeline withdrew the brass key, its eagle and serpent design matching perfectly. With trembling fingers, she inserted it into the lock. Decades of disuse made the mechanism stiff, but with gentle pressure, it turned. A small compartment opened, revealing a leather portfolio sealed with wax, bearing the same combined crest. Knox checked his watch. "We need to move." The return journey seemed eternal, though it took less than 20 minutes. Augustus and Magdalene waited anxiously in the study, their faces lighting with anticipation when they entered with the portfolio. Evangeline placed it on the desk, then carefully broke the wax seal that had protected its contents for 7 decades. Inside lay a collection of documents, photographs, and a small notebook with Giovanni Fournier's name inscribed on the cover in faded ink. The photographs showed Brooklyn docks from various angles, focusing on specific warehouses and ships. Several featured 3 men together, Augustus's younger self, Giovanni Fournier, and a third man Evangeline now recognized from other photos as Beaumont Blackwell, Sterling's father. The notebook contained Giovanni's personal investigation notes, written in the same Cajun French that Evangeline had learned from Delphine. As she translated passages aloud, the room grew increasingly tense with the weight of long-buried truth finally emerging into light. March 3, 1955. Beaumont visited the warehouse alone after hours, claimed he was checking inventory, but I found him examining the hidden compartment in the office floor. The special shipment arrives next week. Knox leaned closer as Evangeline continued reading. March 8th. Overheard Beaumont arguing with someone on the telephone. The final entry, dated March 15th, the day before the explosion, contained the most damning evidence. Found wiring in the warehouse basement, not electrical. Followed it to crates of explosives hidden behind wine barrels. BB initials on the detonator box. Taking photographs as evidence. Going to police tomorrow morning. But most shocking were the final items in the portfolio. Deed documents for a ship called Mississippi Queen, showing joint ownership between Ashford and Fournier families. Insurance documents, and a detailed manifest of the vessel's final cargo that made Evangeline's breath catch. The list included artifacts from Civil War estates, Confederate gold bars, historical documents, and treasures with a total insured value that would translate to hundreds of millions in today's currency. The ship never reached port. Augustus explained, his voice hollow with old grief. It was reported lost in a storm off the coast. But Giovanni and I had already unloaded the most valuable pieces into our warehouse for private distribution to collectors. The explosion destroyed everything, or so we thought. Knox studied the manifest carefully, his tactical mind already running through scenarios. If even a portion of these items survived, my great-grandfather must have suspected the ship wasn't really lost. Evangeline said, connecting pieces of the puzzle that had waited 70 years for assembly. These insurance documents are marked with questions in the margins. He was investigating both the explosion and the ship's disappearance. Magdalene, who had been examining photographs, suddenly held one up. "Look at this." She pointed to a faint circle in the photograph's corner, coordinates written in faded ink beside it. Harbor perspective from above. And these numbers. The true location of the Mississippi Queen. Augustus breathed, understanding flooding his face. Not lost at sea, but deliberately sunk in the harbor. Hidden where no one would think to look. That's what Blackwell is after. Knox concluded with grim certainty, not just evidence of his father's crimes, but the location of a shipment worth a fortune. A shipment that legally belongs to the Ashford and Fournier families. Evangeline sat back, overwhelmed by implications spiraling outward from this revelation. "My grandmother was right to be afraid. This is worth killing for." "Knowledge is power," Augustus said gravely. "Now we know the truth. But Blackwell knows we know. The next move will be his, and it will be desperate." As if summoned by his words, Jasper burst into the study, his normally composed demeanor shaken. "There's been an incident at the hospital. Someone attempted to access Mrs. Fournier's room again. Our men intercepted them. The situation is secure, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Evangeline. "But what?" she demanded, rising to her feet. "Mrs. Fournier is awake and extremely agitated. She's demanding to see you immediately. She claims to have information that can't wait, something she didn't hide in the wall or the bank, something she's kept secret even from you." Knox made the decision before Evangeline could argue. It could be a trap. His certainty carried the weight of experience bought with blood. Blackwell could be monitoring the hospital, waiting for you to return unprotected. "Then come with me," Evangeline challenged, exhaustion making her reckless. "Isn't that why we made this alliance? To protect each other?" The word hung between them, carrying echoes of an oath their grandfathers had sworn in a different era. After a moment measuring risks against obligations, Knox nodded. "We go together, but first we secure these documents in my safe, and we prepare for the possibility that Blackwell is making his final play." The drive back to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital felt like descending into a minefield. Dawn was breaking over the East River, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Knox drove with controlled aggression, 2 SUVs flanking them in tactical formation. Jasper coordinated from the lead vehicle, his voice crackling through the radio with updates that made the danger increasingly tangible. "Blackwell's people are canvassing every entrance. They're not being subtle anymore. He's committed to this play. How many?" Knox's question carried the flat calm of a man who'd survived by counting threats accurately. 12 that we've identified. Could be more inside, disguised as visitors or staff. The hospital parking garage became a war zone disguised as civilian infrastructure. Knox's team moved with military precision, establishing sight lines and escape routes before allowing Evangeline to exit the vehicle. Cordell Hayes materialized at her elbow, his bulk providing mobile cover as they moved toward the elevators. The fourth-floor ICU corridor felt different from her earlier visit. The air carried tension like ozone before lightning, that electric charge when violence becomes inevitable rather than merely possible. Knox's people had established a perimeter around Delphine's room, 6 men in plain clothes who didn't bother hiding the weapons under their jackets. Knox stopped Evangeline with a hand on her arm before they entered. 5 minutes. Whatever she tells you, we need to leave immediately after. This position isn't defensible if Blackwell brings serious numbers. Delphine sat propped against pillows, looking decades older than yesterday. Silver hair hung loose around shoulders that had once carried the weight of family tragedy without bending. But her eyes, those Fournier eyes that had watched empires rise and fall, burned with the intensity of someone racing against a clock only she could hear. "Baby girl." The Cajun French came out rough, abraded by the breathing tube they'd recently removed. "You found Giovanni's evidence. Everything. The map, the notebook, the photographs. We know Beaumont Blackwell planted the explosives. We know about the Mississippi Queen. Delphine's expression shifted through relief and fresh terror in the span of a heartbeat. Then you know half the truth, the dangerous half. But there's more. Things your great-grandfather discovered that were too dangerous to write down, too deadly to trust even to hidden documents. Her gaze found Knox standing near the door, and something ancient and bitter crossed her weathered face. You brought in Ashford into my confidence. He saved your life, Nana, paid for the surgery, protected me when Blackwell's people came hunting. Delphine studied Knox with the assessment of someone who'd spent 70 years learning to read predators. You look like your grandfather did at your age, the same steel in your spine. But Augustus had one weakness Giovanni never understood until it was too late. He believed wealth could buy safety, that enough money and influence could protect the people he loved from consequences. Her attention returned to Evangeline, urgency sharpening every word. The Mississippi Queen carried more than gold and artifacts. There was a second manifest, a secret one that made the treasure secondary to the real cargo. What kind of cargo? Knox stepped closer despite the territorial warning in Delphine's posture. Documents, ledgers, photographs. Delphine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if the walls themselves might betray her. After the Civil War, powerful men needed their pasts erased. Confederate officers who became politicians, plantation owners who became industrialists, war profiteers who bought their way into respectable society. The Mississippi Queen carried their secrets, their true identities, payment records, evidence of crimes that would destroy everything they'd built. Understanding hit Evangeline like a physical blow. Blackmail material, insurance against betrayal, power. Delphine corrected with the certainty of someone who'd watched that power destroy lives. Giovanni and Augustus kept those records as protection. If anyone moved against the partnership, they could expose the buyers. It kept everyone honest through mutually assured destruction. And Beaumont Blackwell wanted it desperately. Knox's tactical mind was already processing implications. Not just the gold, the leverage those documents represented. Delphine nodded, her breathing growing labored as the effort of revelation took its toll. Beaumont found something among his own father's possessions. Evidence that the Blackwell family fortune was built on Confederate gold they'd stolen during Reconstruction. If the ledgers from the Mississippi Queen ever surfaced, it would destroy them politically, financially, socially. Everything they'd built across 4 generations would collapse. She fumbled with the chain around her neck, removing a small silver key different from the brass one that had opened the bank vault. This opens a waterproof case attached to the ship's hull. Inside is the second manifest and the ledgers themselves. The case has a fail-safe mechanism. If opened incorrectly, the contents are destroyed. Acid capsules designed to dissolve paper within seconds. Evangeline accepted the key, feeling its weight multiply beyond mere metal. Delphine gripped her wrist with surprising strength for someone so frail. Be careful who you trust, baby girl. Even those who believe they seek justice may choose power when it's within reach. Her gaze flickered meaningfully toward Knox, the warning explicit. Before Evangeline could respond, the medical alarms began their urgent symphony. Delphine's monitors showed dangerous heart rhythm fluctuations as she collapsed back against the pillows, the effort of confession having extracted a price her damaged heart couldn't afford. The next minutes dissolved into controlled chaos as medical staff rushed in, forcing Evangeline and Knox into the corridor. Through the window, they watched doctors work desperately to stabilize a woman who'd carried too many secrets for too many years. The doctor eventually emerged, looking grave but cautiously optimistic. We've stabilized her again, but these episodes are taking a severe toll. Her heart can't sustain this level of stress much longer. The best thing you can do is let her rest. Knox was already moving, his hand on Evangeline's elbow, guiding her away from the window. We need to leave. Now. Blackwell knows we were here. He'll be repositioning for another attempt. As they moved toward the elevators, Jasper appeared from the stairwell, his expression carrying the particular tension of immediate danger. Problem: Blackwell's people just hit the main entrance. 8 men, heavily armed. They're not trying to hide anymore. Knox's response was instant and absolute. Cordell, take Evangeline down the service elevator. Jasper, you're with me. We'll provide cover and distraction. I'm not leaving you two. Evangeline started, but Knox cut her off with a look that allowed no argument. You're the only person who can open that case without destroying its contents. If something happens to you, everything your great-grandfather died protecting is lost forever. Now go. The service elevator descent felt like falling through levels of hell. Cordell kept his weapon drawn, eyes tracking every floor indicator with the paranoia of someone who'd survived by assuming threats. The doors opened on the basement level, revealing a corridor that should have been empty, but wasn't. 3 of Blackwell's men stood between them and the exit. The moment stretched like taffy before physics reasserted itself and violence became inevitable. Cordell moved with the brutal efficiency of someone trained to end threats permanently. 2 shots, center mass on the nearest gunman, before the man could raise his own weapon. The second attacker managed to get a round off. The bullet sparked off the elevator's metal frame inches from Evangeline's head, before Cordell put him down with a headshot that painted the concrete wall behind him. The third man was smarter, using a gurney for cover while returning fire in controlled bursts. Cordell shoved Evangeline behind a laundry cart, its metal sides offering minimal protection against the 9mm rounds punching through fabric and plastic. Stay down. But Evangeline had spent 3 years taking self-defense classes at a gym she could barely afford, had learned to channel fear into action instead of paralysis. When the third gunman paused to reload, she grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount and hurled it at his head with all the desperate strength poverty had beaten into her muscles. The extinguisher struck his shoulder rather than his skull, but it was enough. The man stumbled, his aim wavering for the half-second Cordell needed to put 2 rounds through his chest. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the ringing in Evangeline's ears and Cordell's controlled breathing. You good? She nodded, not trusting her voice, trying not to look at the bodies cooling on institutional linoleum. Then we move. Now. They emerged into the parking garage to find Knox's team engaged in a running firefight with Blackwell's remaining forces. Muzzle flashes strobed in the dim, concrete expanse, creating a nightmare choreography of advancing and retreating figures. Knox himself was using an SUV for cover, his Beretta barking controlled double taps that drove attackers back into the structural columns. Jasper had flanked to the left, his positioning forcing Blackwell's people into a crossfire that was systematically reducing their numbers. But more were coming. Evangeline could see additional vehicles pulling into the garage entrance, reinforcements that would turn this from a skirmish into a massacre. Knox spotted them and made a tactical decision in the span of a heartbeat. Fall back to the secondary vehicles. We can't hold this position. The retreat was organized chaos, Knox's people providing covering fire while moving in coordinated pairs toward SUVs positioned at multiple exit points. Evangeline found herself shoved into the back seat of a vehicle, already moving before the door fully closed. Cordell's bulk shielding her as bullets spiderwebbed the rear window. The driver executed a J-turn that left rubber on concrete and threw everyone against their seatbelts. Then they were accelerating up the exit ramp, emerging into morning sunlight that felt obscene after the garage's darkness and gunfire. Knox's voice crackled through the radio. Rendezvous at the safe house in Red Hook. Blackwell just declared open war. We need to move on the harbor location before he realizes what we're actually after. The safe house turned out to be a converted warehouse on the waterfront, the kind of industrial space that had been gentrified into expensive lofts everywhere except this particular pocket of Brooklyn that developers hadn't discovered yet. Knox's people transformed it into an operations center within minutes, spreading maps across work tables, checking weapons, preparing for what everyone understood would be the final confrontation. Magdalene was already there, having evacuated from the main estate with Augustus when word came of the hospital attack. The old man looked every one of his 75 years now, the weight of decades pressing down on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. Giovanni tried to warn me. His voice carried the hollowness of ancient regret. The day before the explosion, he wanted to show me something, but I was meeting with a senator, couldn't be bothered to listen to my blood brother's concerns. The past can't be changed. Knox's pragmatism cut through the guilt, but we can finish what Giovanni started. Expose the truth. Make sure Beaumont Blackwell's crimes don't die with him. Evangeline spread the harbor map on the table, the one from Giovanni's hidden documents. The coordinates pointed to a location in Red Hook Channel, an area that had been heavily commercial in the 1950s, but had fallen into disuse after shipping patterns changed. The water depth here would have kept a sunken ship hidden from casual discovery. Magdalene traced the location with a practiced finger. Modern sonar surveys show an anomaly consistent with a mid-sized vessel buried in silt. Knox was already coordinating with a dive team, former Navy SEALs who now worked exclusively for the Ashford organization. They arrived with equipment that looked military-grade, because it was, brought in discreet vehicles that attracted no attention in this industrial wasteland. The dive leader, a weathered man introduced only as Sullivan, studied the coordinates and nodded. 20 minutes down, 20 to locate and retrieve any secured containers, assuming visibility allows. But if Blackwell's monitoring the harbor, he'll spot our boat immediately. Let him. Knox's eyes held the cold calculation of someone committed to a course, regardless of cost. He's coming anyway. Better we control the location than let him choose the battlefield. I'm going down with the team. Evangeline's statement allowed no room for negotiation. The case has a fail-safe that only opens with specific knowledge. My great-grandfather's knowledge passed through my grandmother. I'm the only person who can retrieve it intact. Knox started to object. She could see the refusal forming, but Augustus interceded with the authority of someone who'd made similar, impossible decisions across 7 decades. Let her go, son. This is her birthright as much as ours. Giovanni would expect nothing less from his blood. The boat ride to the coordinates passed intense preparation. Evangeline was fitted with a wetsuit, taught the basics of the rebreather system, briefed on hand signals and emergency procedures. Sullivan made it clear this wasn't a tourist dive. The depth, the darkness, the pressure all created conditions where mistakes became fatal in seconds, rather than minutes. Knox insisted on accompanying her, overriding Sullivan's objections with the flat certainty of someone accustomed to having the final word on operations he commanded. He'd been diving since childhood, had certifications Evangeline didn't understand, but Sullivan respected enough to stop arguing. The sun was setting as their vessel reached the coordinates, painting the harbor in shades of amber and blood. Another boat was already there, and Evangeline's stomach dropped when she recognized the figure standing at its bow. Sterling Blackwell had brought his own dive team, and enough armed men to start a small war. The 2 boats drifted closer until only 20 meters of dark water separated them. Blackwell's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who'd anticipated every move and positioned pieces accordingly. Knox. Miss Fournier. Beautiful evening for diving, isn't it? His voice carried clearly across the water. I assume we're all here for the same reason. The question is whether we retrieve what's down there peacefully or paint this harbor red. Knox stood at their boat's bow, matching Blackwell's relaxed posture while his hand rested on the Beretta at his hip. The Mississippi Queen and everything aboard legally belongs to the Ashford and Fournier families. You have no claim here, Blackwell. Blackwell's laugh held genuine amusement. Legal claims from a crime family. How times change. My father died because of what's on that ship, murdered by Giovanni Fournier, who planted those explosives and blamed an innocent man to cover his own theft. The lie was so brazen, it took Evangeline's breath away. Giovanni documented everything. Her voice carried across the water with more steadiness than she felt. Your father's initials on the detonator, his telephone threats. The evidence proves Beaumont Blackwell was a murderer and a thief. Evidence can be manufactured. Blackwell's tone remained conversational, reasonable. I have documentation showing the opposite. In the end, it comes down to which family has more influence, more resources, more willingness to do what's necessary. He paused, letting implications settle like sediment. I'll make you an offer, Miss Fournier. Partner with me. We split whatever's down there, the gold, the artifacts, the ledgers. You get enough money to care for your grandmother in luxury for the rest of her life. 70 years of believing the Ashfords had murdered her parents. The doubt must have shown on her face because Blackwell pressed his advantage. Your great-grandfather discovered the truth about Augustus Ashford. That's why he had to disappear. Not because of my father, but because he threatened to expose that the Ashfords had been skimming from the partnership for years. Augustus's voice carried from their boat, strengthened by fury and desperation. Lies! Giovanni was my brother in everything but blood. Then why did he disappear immediately after the explosion? Blackwell's logic had a seductive surface reasonability. Why did he run instead of staying to rebuild with you? The words wormed into Evangeline's brain, finding purchase in fears she'd been trying to suppress. She looked at Knox, searching his winter-gray eyes for deception or truth. Knox met her gaze steadily. Your great-grandfather ran because he believed my family had failed to protect him. Because in his grief and fear, he accepted the easiest explanation for impossible tragedy. But he was wrong. And if you let Blackwell manipulate you the same way, Giovanni's sacrifice was for nothing. The moment crystallized into a decision point that would determine everything that followed. Evangeline thought of Delphine fighting for every breath in a hospital bed, thought of her parents wrapped around a highway support column, thought of 70 years of running and hiding and carrying secrets that had poisoned 3 generations. Some debts can only be paid with truth. Her voice carried across the water with absolute conviction. I'm going down there. I'm retrieving what my great-grandfather died protecting, and I'm going to expose everyone's crimes, Beaumont Blackwell's, and anyone else who has blood on their hands. No more secrets, no more deals. Just truth, whatever it costs. Blackwell's expression hardened into something that finally matched the predator underneath his civilized veneer. Then you've chosen to die with the Ashfords. So be it. What followed happened with the compressed violence of a grenade detonating. Blackwell's men opened fire, the first shots shattering the tense standoff into chaos. Knox's people returned fire from defensive positions, the boats rocking violently as muzzle flashes strobed across darkening water. Knox grabbed Evangeline, shoving her toward the dive equipment. Get your gear on, now. We're going down while they're distracted. Sullivan and another diver, a woman introduced as Martinez, were already fully equipped. They hit the water in a tight cluster, descending rapidly while gunfire created bubbling trails above their heads. The world transformed into something alien and hostile as darkness swallowed them whole. The harbor bottom materialized gradually through the murk, 25 meters of cold, black water pressing down with weight that made Evangeline's ears scream despite equalizing pressure. Sullivan's powerful light swept across silt and debris, searching for the distinctive outline that would mark their target. Then there it was. The Mississippi Queen rested on its side, hull partially buried in decades of accumulated sediment. The ship was smaller than Evangeline had imagined from photographs, maybe 40 meters stem to stern, but it had clearly been built for cargo rather than speed. Barnacles and marine growth covered every surface, transforming smooth wood into something organic and grotesque. Sullivan led them toward what remained of the captain's quarters, his light revealing a doorway hanging open on corroded hinges. Inside, the preserved by silt interior showed the arrested moment of sinking. Furniture tumbled against walls, papers scattered across what had been the floor, but was now a vertical surface. Knox found it first, his light reflecting off metal secured to what had been the deck. A case the size of a large briefcase, built from brass and steel that had survived 70 years of immersion. The combined Ashford-Fournier crest marked the top, and a complex lock mechanism waited for the key Evangeline carried in a waterproof pouch. She swam closer, removing Delphine's silver key with fingers clumsy in thick gloves. The lock had 3 keyholes arranged in a triangle pattern, and Evangeline suddenly understood the failsafe Delphine had mentioned. Insert the key wrong, or in the wrong sequence, and acid capsules would destroy the contents instantly. She closed her eyes, reaching for memory. Delphine's voice echoing through years of instruction. Always toward the light, baby girl, never toward darkness. Evangeline inserted the key in the top position, toward where light would come from if the case sat upright on a desk. She turned it 3 times clockwise, heard something click, then shifted the key to the right-hand position. 2 more turns, another click. Finally, the left position, a single turn, and the whole mechanism released with a metallic thunk that reverberated through water. The case opened, revealing multiple waterproof document pouches that had somehow survived decades of pressure and corrosion. Evangeline began transferring them to the mesh bags Sullivan held ready, working quickly because her air gauge showed 20 minutes remaining and the journey back would consume half that. She was reaching for the last pouch when something rammed into her from behind. The impact drove her into the bulkhead, knocking her regulator from her mouth. Water filled her throat as she spun, disoriented, searching for the source of the attack. One of Blackwell's divers had found them. The man held a dive knife, its blade gleaming in Sullivan's light as he lunged at Evangeline again. Knox intercepted, catching the attacker's wrist and twisting with brutal efficiency. The knife tumbled away into darkness as the 2 men grappled in the confined space. Evangeline found her regulator and cleared it, gasping in air while Martinez positioned herself between the fight and the precious cargo they'd recovered. More lights appeared at the doorway, 2 additional Blackwell divers entering the already crowded quarters. Sullivan made a tactical decision, grabbing Evangeline and signaling forcefully, "Up! Now!" But Evangeline shook her head, pointing at Knox, who was still engaged with his attacker. She wasn't leaving him to face multiple enemies alone, in an environment where mistakes meant drowning rather than merely losing. Martinez understood, moving to assist Knox while Sullivan covered their ascent route. What followed was combat unlike anything Evangeline had ever imagined. Slow-motion violence constrained by water resistance and the need to maintain air supplies. Knox managed to break his opponent's grip, slamming the man's head into a metal support beam hard enough that bubbles exploded from the attacker's regulator. The second Blackwell diver went after Martinez, but she'd been ready, her knife finding his thigh in a strike that turned water dark with blood. The third diver made the mistake of going for the cargo bag. Evangeline didn't think, just reacted, grabbing a piece of debris and swinging it at the diver's head with everything she had. The impact was cushioned by water, but still effective enough to stun. Knox was there instantly, grabbing the disoriented attacker and shoving him away from the precious documents they'd risked everything to retrieve. Sullivan signaled again. "Up! Time!" They ascended in a tight formation, the mesh bag secured to Martinez's harness, while Sullivan and Knox covered above and below. Evangeline monitored her gauges with growing anxiety. They were cutting it close on air, and if anything went wrong during the ascent, the pressure changes would kill them faster than drowning. The surface seemed impossibly far away. Evangeline focused on her breathing, on not ascending too quickly, on the mechanical details that kept panic at bay. They broke surface into chaos. The boats were still engaged, though the firing had become sporadic. Knox's people had forced Blackwell's vessel back, creating a defensive perimeter. Hands reached down, hauling Evangeline aboard while she was still shedding equipment. Knox came up beside her, water streaming from his wetsuit as he stripped the rebreather and grabbed the mesh bag from Martinez. Did we get it? Jasper's question carried the weight of everything they'd risked. Knox opened the bag, examining the waterproof pouches inside. We got it. Everything Giovanni died protecting. On the other boat, Sterling Blackwell stood at the bow, watching with the impotent rage of someone who'd committed everything to a play that had failed at the final moment. This isn't over, Ashford. Those documents changed nothing without proof of their authenticity. Knox's smile held merciless satisfaction. See, that's where you're wrong. We don't need courts or public opinion. We just need a few strategic leaks to the right journalists. Your father's crimes, your family's Confederate gold, it all comes out. He paused, letting Blackwell absorb the implications. Or you walk away. Right now. Forever. You leave the Ashford and Fournier families alone. And in exchange, these documents stay sealed. Your father's crimes remain between us. Blackwell's face worked through calculations, weighing pride against survival. The silence stretched like a blade against a throat. Finally, he spoke, each word clearly costing him something vital. What guarantee do I have you won't use this against me later? My word. Knox's certainty carried absolute commitment. Bound by the same oath my grandfather swore to Giovanni Fournier. In our world, that still means something. Another silence, longer this time. Then Blackwell turned to his boat's captain, issuing orders Evangeline couldn't hear. The vessel's engines roared to life, and it began backing away. Blackwell stood at the rail as his boat departed, his eyes locked on Knox's, with the promise of enmity that would survive them both, if given opportunity. But he was leaving. The immediate threat was over. The documents were analyzed over the following weeks by lawyers and historians Knox trusted absolutely. The ledgers proved even more devastating than initial examination suggested. 47 individuals whose descendants still occupied positions of power, all connected to crimes that would shatter careers and dynasties if made public. But Knox kept his word to Blackwell. The documents remained sealed, their contents known only to a handful of people with vested interest in keeping old secrets buried. Delphine recovered slowly, her heart surgery successful enough to buy her years instead of weeks. When she was strong enough to leave the hospital, it was to a private room in the Ashford estate, where Augustus visited her daily to share memories of New Orleans and the brothers they'd both loved and lost. 6 months after the dive, Evangeline stood in the gleaming headquarters of Ashford Fournier Imports, watching ships move across the harbor from her corner office. The company had been restructured, legitimized, transformed from gray market operations into an enterprise that could survive scrutiny. Augustus appeared in her doorway, moving more slowly than 6 months earlier, but with a contentment that had been absent when they first met. The board meeting is ready. They're waiting for you. Before we go in, I have something for you. Augustus withdrew a small velvet box from his jacket. This belonged to Giovanni. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it to his family. Inside was a brass compass, old and worn, with the combined family crest engraved on the cover. When Evangeline opened it, she found an inscription. To my brother Augustus, may we never lose our way. Giovanni, 1948. She felt tears burn behind her eyes. He forgave you. The words came out rough. Before he died, Giovanni forgave whatever he thought you'd done. Otherwise, he wouldn't have hidden the evidence where you might find it. Perhaps Augustus's voice carried uncertainty, or perhaps he just understood that some oaths transcend even death. They walked together to the conference room where Knox and Magdalene waited. Knox looked up as they entered, his winter gray eyes finding Evangeline's with an intensity that still made her breath catch. We have a situation in Charleston. Magdalene pulled up shipping manifests. One of our containers was flagged by customs. Evangeline settled into her chair, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of power in equal measure. What's in the container? Officially? Magdalene's smile held her father's ruthless efficiency, textiles and machine parts. Unofficially, let's just say some of our business partners prefer transactions that don't appear in public records. So we're still smuggling. Evangeline's tone carried more amusement than judgment, just with better lawyers. We prefer to think of it as facilitating commerce. Knox's deadpan delivery made it almost believable. They spent the next hour solving the Charleston problem, using connections and money, and carefully applied pressure to make an inconvenient inspection disappear into bureaucratic limbo. As the meeting concluded, Knox lingered after Augustus and Magdalene departed. "You did well today." His praise came sparingly enough that Evangeline had learned to value it. "You're thinking like a partner now, not an employee. Is there a difference?" "Everything's a difference." Knox moved to the window overlooking the harbor. "An employee worries about keeping their job. A partner worries about keeping the entire enterprise alive." Evangeline joined him at the window, watching the same harbor where the Mississippi Queen had rested for 70 years. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? Keeping those documents sealed instead of exposing everything?" "Every day." Knox's honesty surprised her. "But I also remember that truth without justice is just cruelty. Those 47 people in the ledgers, most of them are dead. Their children built lives believing the lies. Destroying that doesn't bring Giovanni back. It just creates new victims and calls it righteousness." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes held something beyond professional respect. "You could have walked away after Delphine's surgery was paid for. No one would have blamed you." "The thought never occurred to me. Once I understood what my great-grandfather died protecting, walking away would have meant his sacrifice was for nothing." Knox's hand found hers, the gesture carrying weight beyond its simplicity. "Giovanni would be proud of you. And I think he'd approve of how this turned out. The families united again, the oath honored, the truth preserved without becoming a weapon." Evangeline's phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. Delphine asking when she'd visit, complaining that Augustus talked too much about the old days. "I should go see my grandmother. Tell her we're having dinner tomorrow night. All of us. Augustus, Delphine, you, me, Magdalene." Knox's suggestion carried significance beyond a simple meal. It's time both sides of this partnership stopped treating each other like business associates and started acting like family. Evangeline thought about families built on blood and families built on oaths, about the difference between the two, and how sometimes they became the same thing through choice rather than genetics. "I'll tell her, but she'll complain about it the whole time." Knox's smile transformed his usually severe features into something warmer, more human. "I'm counting on it." As Evangeline prepared to leave, Knox's voice stopped her at the door. "One more thing. We've been monitoring Blackwell's activities in Miami. He's building something down there. New partnerships. I think he's planning a return, and when he comes back, it won't be with lawsuits. How long do we have? A year, maybe 2 if we're lucky." Knox's calculation carried the certainty of experience. "But he's coming. Then we'll be ready." Evangeline heard the words come out and recognized the person she'd become, someone who planned for wars instead of fearing them. Knox nodded, satisfied. "That's what I wanted to hear. Because when Blackwell returns, we'll need to be united. The Ashford and Fournier families, together again like our grandfathers intended." Evangeline left the office as evening settled over Brooklyn, transforming familiar streets into something both strange and deeply known. She'd walked these sidewalks as a nobody. Now she walked them as somebody, wearing power like the expensive suits that hung in her closet. But she also carried the compass that had belonged to Giovanni Fournier, a reminder that some directions were worth holding to, regardless of how the world changed. Honor, family, truth. She pulled out her phone and called Delphine. "Nana, it's me. Knox wants to do dinner tomorrow. All of us together. Family dinner." Delphine's voice came through, stronger than it had been. "Family dinner with an Ashford. Your great-grandfather is spinning in his grave. Maybe. Evangeline watched the last light fade from the sky. Or maybe he's finally resting, knowing we finished what he started. A pause, then Delphine's grudging acknowledgement. I suppose Augustus isn't entirely terrible. For an Ashford, high praise coming from you. Don't let it go to his head. But yes, baby girl, tell them we'll be there. It's time these old bones stopped running from ghosts. Evangeline ended the call and stood for a moment on the corner where her old life and new life intersected. The locket around her neck still held her parents' photograph, but she also wore Giovanni's compass now, its weight balanced against her heartbeat. Tomorrow there would be dinner with family, both kinds. Next week there would be challenges. Next year, maybe the war Knox predicted. But tonight, Evangeline Fournier stood at the intersection of past and future. The compass needle pointed steadily north, holding true despite everything that tried to pull it off course. And Evangeline followed its direction into whatever came next, knowing that some journeys never truly ended. They just changed who was walking them.